Welcome to the reading of the Sabbath School lesson for the second quarter of 2022. Welcome to lesson number 6 in the series on Genesis. It's titled The Roots of Abraham. It's ready for teaching on May 7, and I'm Percy Harrold. Monday, May 2, the temptation of Egypt. Read Genesis chapter 12, verses 10 to 20. Why did Abram leave the promised land to go to Egypt? How did the Pharaoh behave in comparison to Abram? Genesis 12, beginning at verse 10. Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to dwell there, for the famine was severe in the land. And it came to pass, when he was close to entering Egypt, that he said to Sarai his wife, Indeed, I know that you are a woman of beautiful countenance. Therefore it will happen, when the Egyptians see you, that they will say, This is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will let you live. Please say you are my sister, that it may be well with me for your sake, and that I may live because of you. So it was, when Abram came into Egypt, that the Egyptians saw the woman, that she was beautiful. The princes of Pharaoh also saw her and commended her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken to Pharaoh's house. He treated Abram well for her sake. He had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male and female servants, female donkeys, and camels. But the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. And Pharaoh called Abram and said, What is this you have done? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say, She is my sister? I might have taken her as my wife. Now therefore, here is your wife, take her and go your way. So Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. Ironically, Abram, who had just arrived in the promised land, decides to leave it for Egypt because there was a famine in the land, as we read in verse 10. Evidence of people from Canaan going into Egypt in times of famine is well attested in ancient Egyptian texts. In the Egyptian teaching of Merikari, a text composed during the period of the Middle Kingdom, 2060 to 1700 BC, people coming from Canaan are identified as miserable Asiatic, that's AAMU, and described as wretched, short of water. He does not dwell on one place. Food propels his legs, which is a quote from Miriam Lichtheim's Ancient Egyptian Literature, Volume 1, The Old and Middle Kingdoms, pages 103 and 104. The temptation of Egypt was often a problem for the ancient Israelites. Numbers 14 and verse 3, Why has the Lord brought us to this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and children should become victims? Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt? And Jeremiah chapter 2 verse 18, And now why take the road to Egypt to drink the waters of Sihor? Or why take the road to Assyria to drink the waters of the river? Egypt thus became a symbol of humans trusting in humans rather than God, as we read in 2 Kings 18 verse 20. Now look, you are trusting in the staff of this broken reed Egypt, on which if a man leans, it will go into his hand and pierce it. So is Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to all who trust in him. And Isaiah 36 verse 6, Look, you are trusting in the staff of this broken reed Egypt, on which if a man leans, it will go into his hand and pierce it. So is Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to all who trust him. And verse 9, How then will you repel one captain of the least of my master's servants, and put your trust in Egypt for chariots and horsemen? In Egypt, where water could be seen on a daily basis, faith was not necessary, for the promise of the land was immediately visible. Compared to the land of famine, Egypt sounded like a good place to be, despite what God had said to Abram. The Abram who now leaves Canaan contrasts with the Abram who left Ur. Before, Abram was portrayed as a man of faith who left Ur in response to God's call. Now, Abram leaves the promised land by himself of his own volition. Before, Abram relied on God. Now he behaves like a manipulative and unethical politician who counts only on himself. Ellen White writes in Patriarchs and Prophets, page 130, during his stay in Egypt, Abraham gave evidence that he was not free from human weaknesses and imperfection. In concealing the fact that Sarah was his wife, he betrayed a distrust of the divine care, a lack of that lofty faith and courage so often and nobly exemplified in his life." End of quote. What we see here, then, is how even a great man of God can make a mistake and yet not be forsaken by God. When the New Testament talks about Abraham as the example of salvation by grace, it means just that, grace. Because if it weren't for grace, Abraham, like all of us, would have had no hope. And so to finish the day, what should this story teach us about how easy it is, even for faithful Christians, to stray from the correct path? Why is disobedience never a good choice? This lesson was read by Dr. Percy Harrold for Christian Services for the Blind. Sponsored by the Sabbath School Department and distributed through Hope Channel Australia, this podcast is also redistributed by Hope Channel Germany, Christian Record Services for the Blind, and It Is Written. It is also available on SoundCloud and through multiple podcast distributors, including Apple iTunes. Remember, God is always faithful.